Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The glass of champagne in Julian's hand shattered, not because he dropped it, but because his grip had tightened until the crystal finally surrendered to the violence of his pulse. Blood mixed with the sparkling wine, dripping onto the pristine white marble of the balcony, but Julian didn't feel the sting. His eyes were locked on the man standing across the grand ballroom, a man who looked like he had been carved from glaciers and dressed in midnight. That was Professor Alistair Vance, the man Julian had been paid a fortune to destroy, the man who was currently looking at Julian not with the hatred he deserved, but with a terrifying, possessive concern that made Julian's lungs seize. 3 months earlier, the air in the private VIP room of the Obsidian Lounge had smelled of expensive cigars and desperation. "I don't want him hurt physically," the client had said. He was a small man, Alistair's younger half-brother, trembling with an inferiority complex that filled the room. "I want him ruined. Alistair is the golden boy of the university, the heir to the Vance pharmaceutical empire, the untouchable genius. If he secures the dean's position next month, I lose my claim to the family trust. I need a scandal. A big one." Julian leaned back in the velvet chair, crossing his long legs. He was beautiful in a way that was calculated to be disarming: soft features, doe eyes, a smile that promised heaven but delivered hell. He was a professional breaker, a specialized mercenary of the heart. Usually, he was hired to seduce cheating husbands away from wives or to break up gold-digging boyfriends. But this was a hit job. "You want me to seduce the Iceberg Professor and then expose the affair?" Julian asked, his voice smooth like polished stone. "Public indecency? Moral turpitude?" "Exactly. Get him to fall for you. Get evidence. Leak it. $1 million. Wired to your offshore account the moment his tenure is revoked." Julian checked his nails. "Done. But you should know, I don't fail. Once I sink my claws in, they bleed." Entering Alistair Vance's world was like stepping into a cryochamber. The man was a theoretical physicist, obsessed with time and entropy, and he ran his department with the ruthless efficiency of a machine. Julian, posing as Ron, a transfer graduate student with a tragic backstory and a brilliant but unpolished mind, expected resistance. He didn't expect a fortress. For the first 2 weeks, Alistair didn't even look at him. Julian was part of the furniture, a decorative object in the background of Alistair's lectures. "Mr. Wren." Alistair's voice had cut through the lecture hall on the 3rd week. It was a deep baritone, devoid of warmth. "If you intend to stare at me with those wide, vacuous eyes for the entire semester, I suggest you transfer to the drama department. Here, we study the laws of the universe, not the geometry of my jawline." The class tittered. Julian felt the flush on his cheeks, not of embarrassment, but of the thrill of the hunt. Challenge accepted, Julian changed tactics. He stopped the overt flirting. He became indispensable. He organized Alistair's chaotic reference library. He brought coffee that was exactly the right temperature. He stayed late in the lab, faking complex calculations until his eyes burned. The cracks in the ice appeared on a stormy Tuesday night. The university archives were located in the basement, a labyrinth of dust and shadows. Julian was working late, knowing Alistair was in his private office down the hall. Julian staged the accident perfectly. He climbed a ladder to reach a high shelf, loosened his grip on a heavy stack of ledgers, and let gravity do the rest. The crash was deafening. Alistair appeared in the doorway seconds later, his usually immaculate suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to reveal surprisingly muscular forearms. He saw Julian sprawled on the floor, surrounded by books, clutching his ankle. "Idiot," Alistair hissed, rushing forward. I'm sorry, Professor," Julian stammered, infusing his voice with just the right amount of pain and bravery. "I slipped." Alistair dropped to his knees. For a man who preached about the cold indifference of the universe, his hands were startlingly warm. He touched Julian's ankle with clinical precision, but his thumb lingered on the arch of Julian's foot. "It's not broken. Just a sprain," Alistair murmured. He looked up, and for the first time, their eyes truly met. Alistair had eyes the color of steel, sharp and intelligent, but beneath the surface, Julian saw the exhaustion of a man who had been holding up the sky for too long. "Why do you try so hard, Ren?" Alistair asked quietly. "You don't care about physics. I see the way you look at the equations. They bore you." Julian's heart skipped a beat. "He knows," Julian improvised. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and brushed a speck of dust from Alistair's shoulder. "I don't care about the equations, Professor. I care about the man trying to solve them. You look lonely." It was a gamble, a cliché, but clichés worked for a reason. Alistair stiffened. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, Alistair grabbed Julian's wrist. His grip was strong, bordering on painful. "Be careful, Ron," Alistair warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are playing a game you do not understand. I am not a man who tolerates variables I cannot control." "Then control me," Julian whispered back. The kiss that followed wasn't romantic. It was a collision. Alistair devoured him, pressing him down into the pile of fallen books. It was a release of pent-up pressure, a starving man finally touching bread. Julian responded instantly, wrapping his arms around Alistair's neck, mentally checking off the steps of the plan. Phase 1 complete. Contact established. But as Alistair's hand tangled in Julian's hair, protecting his head from the hard floor, Julian felt a strange pang in his chest. A warning tremor. This wasn't just lust, it was a desperate, clawing need. Alistair wasn't kissing him like a conquest. He was kissing him like a lifeline. The affair consumed them. It was a whirlwind of stolen moments in the lab, heated whispers in the library, and nights spent in Alistair's minimalist, high-security penthouse. Julian learned that the iceberg was a defense mechanism. Alistair had been betrayed by everyone. His father, his brother, his academic peers. He hid his heart in a vault of intellect because it was the only safe place. And Julian? Julian was systematically picking the lock to rob him blind. "I've never done this," Alistair confessed one morning, tracing the line of Julian's spine as the morning sun filtered through the blinds. "I never let anyone in. It's inefficient, distracting." "Am I a distraction?" Julian asked, resting his head on Alistair's chest, listening to the steady, reassuring thrum of his heart. "You are a catastrophe," Alistair replied, pressing a kiss to Julian's forehead. "A beautiful, entropic catastrophe. And I find I don't want to solve it." Julian closed his eyes, fighting the nausea rising in his throat. He had the photos. He had the recordings of Alistair admitting to ethics violations to protect Julian's grades. He had the smoking gun. The client was calling every hour, demanding the kill shot. "Do it," the professional side of his brain screamed. Take the million. Disappear to Bali. But when he looked at Alistair, he didn't see a mark. He saw the first person who had ever looked at Julian and seen value, not just utility. The timeline jumped back to the present. The ballroom, the shattered glass, the blood on the marble. Tonight was the faculty gala. The night Alistair was to be announced as the new dean. The night Julian's client had decided to take matters into his own hands because Julian was stalling. Julian's phone buzzed in his tuxedo pocket. A text from the half-brother. "You've gone soft. I'm releasing the photos in 5 minutes. The board members will get them on their phones during his speech. Nice knowing you." Panic, cold and visceral, flooded Julian's veins. He looked across the room. Alistair was making his way toward the podium, looking regal, untouchable. If those photos leaked, images of them in bed, audio of Alistair bending rules for a student, Alistair's career would be incinerated. He would be humiliated. Julian looked at his bleeding hand. He looked at Alistair. He made a choice. He didn't run to stop the signal. It was too late. He couldn't stop the leak. But he could control the narrative. He could change the context. Julian sprinted. He shoved past a waiter, ignoring the gasps as he vaulted onto the low stage just as Alistair reached the microphone. "Alistair!" Julian shouted. The room went silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to the beautiful young man with the bleeding hand and the wild expression. Alistair turned, his brows knitting together in confusion. "Ren? What are you?" Julian grabbed the microphone. He had to destroy himself to save Alistair. He had to make himself the villain so completely that Alistair would be seen as the victim, not the co-conspirator. "He doesn't know," Julian yelled to the crowd, his voice breaking with masterful acting. He doesn't know who I really am. He turned to Alistair, tears streaming down his face. Real tears this time. I'm sorry, Professor. I can't do it anymore. I was hired. Alistair froze. What? Your brother. Julian pointed a shaking finger at the VIP balcony where the little man was watching, pale as a ghost. He paid me to seduce you. To plant evidence. To ruin your reputation so he could take the inheritance. The crowd gasped. The murmur was like a tidal wave. I have the wire transfers. Julian shouted, pulling a stack of folded papers from his jacket, the bank records he had printed out as insurance. He threw them into the air like confetti. I faked the grades. I drugged his wine. Professor Vance never wanted me. I forced my way into his life to destroy him. It was a lie. The drugging and forcing were lies. Alistair had been a willing, tender lover. But to save Alistair's reputation, Julian had to paint him as a victim of a corporate espionage plot, unsuspecting and violated, rather than a man who slept with his student. Alistair stood frozen, his face draining of all color. The betrayal in his eyes was absolute. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at Julian. He saw the truth beneath the lie. Julian was a hired gun. The intimacy, the late nights, the vulnerability, it was all a transaction. Security guards rushed the stage. Julian didn't fight them. As they dragged him away, he locked eyes with Alistair one last time. Hate me, Julian pleaded silently. Hate me, so you can survive? Alistair didn't scream. He didn't rage. He simply watched, his face returning to that mask of ice, impenetrable and cold. The iceberg had reformed, harder than before. 6 months later, Julian was living in a dingy apartment in a city 3 hours away. He had returned the money. He was working as a bartender, keeping his head down. The scandal had been massive, but it had played out exactly as he planned. The brother was disowned. Alistair was painted as the tragic victim of a corporate honey trap. He got the deanship. The public sympathy made him untouchable. Julian was wiping down the counter at 2 a.m. when the bell above the door chimed. The wind from the open door was biting cold. Julian didn't look up. We're closed. Then unlock the door for me. The voice paralyzed him. It was deep, smooth, and laced with a terrifying calm. Julian looked up. Alistair Vance stood in the doorway. He was wearing a cashmere coat that cost more than Julian's entire apartment building. He looked tired, older, but his eyes were burning with a fire that defied the cold. Alistair, Julian breathed. Get out. You shouldn't be seen with me. I'm the predator who— Be quiet, Alistair commanded. He walked to the bar, the sound of his dress shoes echoing in the empty room. He placed a folder on the counter. What is this? Julian asked. My investigation, Alistair said. I'm a physicist, Ran. Or Julian. Whatever your name is. I look for the truth beneath the noise. I analyze the timeline. I analyze the evidence you claim to have. You lied on that stage. Alistair leaned over the bar, invading Julian's space. You said you drugged me. You didn't. You said I didn't want you. That was the biggest lie of all. Julian's hands shook. I did it to save you. If I hadn't taken the blame, they would have destroyed your career. I don't care about the career. Alistair roared, the control finally snapping. He grabbed Julian by the collar, pulling him over the bar until their faces were inches apart. I care that you made me fall in love with a phantom. I care that you sacrificed yourself and left me alone in that godforsaken ivory tower. I was a job, Julian yelled back, tears stinging his eyes. I'm a fake. A liar. You're mine, Alistair snarled. He kissed Julian then, brutal and punishing. It tasted of anger and months of starvation. Julian tried to push him away, but Alistair was immovable. He pinned Julian against the liquor shelves, bottles rattling. You owe me. Alistair whispered against Julian's lips, his voice dropping to that dangerous, possessive register. You took my heart, shattered it, and tried to sell the pieces. I'm here to collect the debt. I have nothing, Julian sobbed, gripping Alistair's coat. You have yourself, Alistair said, his thumb wiping a tear from Julian's cheek. And you are going to spend the rest of your life making it up to me. You are going to be my assistant, my lover, and my problem. And if you ever try to leave me to save me again, I will burn the entire university to the ground myself just to find you. Julian looked into the eyes of the man he had tried to ruin. The ice was gone. In its place was a raging inferno, and Julian knew, with terrifying certainty, that he would happily burn in it forever. "Okay," Julian whispered. "Okay." Alistair straightened his coat, regaining his composure, though his hand remained firmly on the back of Julian's neck. "Good. The car is outside. We're going home." And that is how the liar saved the truth, only to be captured by it. If you enjoyed seeing Alistair shatter Julian's defenses to claim what was his, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a lover who was paid to destroy you? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,